The most important character in One Piece is someone that you have never met. Who is this person? How is this possible? I have eyes, why can't I see them? Well, just calm down, because a strange man on the internet is about to explain everything. My name is Liam, and I am so glad that nobody narrates my life, because it'd be a bit like, he sat at his desk and made videos about fictional pirates for the 931st day in a row. Somebody please kill me. But we're here today to examine the luckiest narrator in all of narratordom, someone you are extraordinarily familiar with, yet somehow have never seen. In fact, you don't even know their name. Stop me if you've heard this one before. Wealth, fame, and power. The Pirate King, Gold Roger, blah blah blah. You were supposed to stop me and you didn't. But that is probably the most iconic quote in One Piece, and the narrator, more often than not, is responsible for many of the most memorable moments in the series. Another example would be Whitebeard's death. Neither that mighty body nor his pirate's pride suffered even one coward's wound. Or Kaido's introduction. People say in a one-on-one fight, always bet on Kaido. Or perhaps the most iconic narrator quote of all, oh my, what a mess. No wait, that was Shanks. Either way, whether you realize it or not, the narrator is every bit as important to One Piece as prominent characters like Luffy, Zoro, and Swamp Zoro. And throughout all of the everything, there has been one brightly burning question, being who is the narrator? Who is telling the story of One Piece, and how do we know that it's an in-world character? Well, those are questions that need answers. Answers from me, I suppose. When it comes to a narrator, we essentially have three options. Firstly, there are character within the series speaking to us. Secondly, it's the author directly speaking to us. And finally, the narrator is neither. They act more like a divine entity guiding you through the story, but never solidifying their presence one way or the other. And you can usually tell what kind of narrator a story has by whether they speak in first, second, or third person. First person speech generally indicates a character because it places them in the world. Second person, it's always a bit weird because it usually tries to turn the reader into a character. Whereas third person is a vague defined entity that describes all of the stuff. And One Piece narration is primarily third person, until it isn't. One of the reasons why the narrator is so difficult to pin down is because in One Piece there is no consistent narrator. For example, while much of the series narration is third person, there are intriguing occasions where this does switch to first person. Instances of this can be found in the very early days of East Blue with the flashbacks of Buggy and Gaimon, all the way up to modern day Wano when Kozuki Oden took on the narrator's mantle for his flashback. And the switch between first and third person happens quite frequently within One Piece. And furthermore, it has a tendency to happen quite seamlessly, especially in the early days when Oda didn't have a visual method of identifying voices. They all just got shoved into the same Oda box, you know, the one with the fun swirly corners. Although in later chapters, Oda makes this more clear, like when Oden's narration takes place in boxes that look like these torn pieces of paper. Something to separate his voice from the being that we are now going to refer to as the true narrator. But even then, their role is very difficult to pin down. The true narrator often exists to dump essential information. They frequently denote times, places, and introduce new characters, almost like a series historian. And the true narrator has a demonstrable knowledge of the world that seemingly none of the characters have. A great example of this is the final chapter of Thriller Bark, where the narrator brings our attention to the massive monster thing in the fog. But historians generally speak in the past tense, you know, they did this, or they did that, and they did that because of reasons. I mean, I don't know, I am not a history. But the true narrator of One Piece, for all of their vagaries, often speaks rather tantalizingly in the present tense. But what makes that tantalization even more tantalizing is that this narrator clearly has knowledge of future events, such as chapter 800, which saw the formation of the Straw Hat Grand Fleet, accompanied by the following narration. 7 odd and mighty warriors labeled themselves the followers of Straw Hat Luffy. After this moment, they will each grow in power until they eventually cause a great incident of historic proportions. But for the moment, that is a story no one yet knows about. Which is odd, because if this was some sort of retrospective account, then everyone reading it would know about the thing that we don't know about. It's so weird. Sometimes the narration is almost written like the speech of a time traveler who is currently in the present, but who has already explored both the past and the future. And this is probably the point where we'd go, it's just the voice of Oda, but things get much weirder. The true narrator seems very unlikely to be a real-life person, which is a good definition of what Oda is. It's also what I am, and assumedly what you are, but it's what the true narrator of One Piece almost certainly isn't. There are many indicators that the narrator does exist in world. One of the strongest being that they tend to quote other fictional characters, such as chapter 218, where as a ship falls from the sky, the narrator says, "Anything man can imagine is a possibility in reality," and attributes that quote to a physicist named Willie Caron, which is a nice quote, but Willie Caron, much like Frankie's sense of shame, does not exist. And this isn't just a one-off either. The true narrator has name-dropped a series of triple Fs being famous fictional figures, which seems to cement their existence as part of the fiction as well. So the true narrator exists in this world. But who is it? And there are a series of shockingly plausible possibilities, and we will begin with the Straw Hats. They have this many crew members who could be feasibly telling this story. The first of which is Robin. As an individual who strives to preserve history, it makes a lot of sense that she would endeavor to pass on the life and times of one Straw Hat Luffy, particularly as he is set to irrevocably change the world as we know it. In fact, by the end of One Piece, he'll likely be the single most important historical figure to have ever existed, which is kind of sweet because Robin would then get to live the thing that she loves the most: dull, musty, monkey-based history. She's certainly not the only one though, and another character who was born to tell stories would be the Pinocchio we have at home, Usopp. And in many ways, Usopp would be a better choice than Robin because he's much better at creating an exciting story, whether that story actually happened or not, I suppose, which may bring some depressing implications because we'd never know how much of the One Piece we read actually happened. Although if it's any consolation, none of this actually happened. These are just all drawings on paper. But there is something kind of sweet about the idea of One Piece being the story told to Kaya upon Usopp's return to Syrup Village. And there's also something rather nice about the idea of the story being told from the perspective of a completely normal person. Someone who never had access to all of the crazy superpowers of those around him, just your average human embarking on an extraordinary journey, the length of which only being rivaled by the nose of the human in question. And our final option for Straw Hat storytellers would be Brook. This is probably the biggest reach within the crew, and it mostly hinges on the idea that Brook is going to, rather ironically, outlive the rest of the crew, then going on to become some sort of wizened global elder, tasked with passing down the holy tale of our Lord and Savior Monkey D. Luffy to one and all. I will say that there's probably not enough panty shots in One Piece for Brook to be the narrator. However, it would definitely explain why Nami and Robin keep expanding their assets. Yo! But outside of the Straw Hats, there are also some very reasonable candidates. And when the topic of the narrator comes up, one of my first thoughts is always Sabo, particularly because he has this very specific dream of wanting to see the world and write a book about it. And he's very well situated to record the journey of Luffy in particular because he knew Luffy as a child. He also knows Luffy's father, and he clearly has a vast knowledge of the world due to his position as a global nuisance. He'd also be the type of person who, perhaps after all of this world government shenaniganry is over, decides to take a journey across the planet and figure out all those mysteries like the shadow creature of Thriller Bark. But also, very interesting thing now. If we examine Luffy's flashback after Marineford, we find that the narrator is incredibly prominent. Much more so than usual. In fact, there are times when we have entire 2-page spreads of just narration describing the Goa Kingdom. And I want to emphasize, this is, it's almost painfully detailed information, like if One Piece was written by Tolkien. And this is extremely unusual, not only for the narrator in general, but even more unusual for a flashback, because you generally don't hear much from the narrator during a flashback, and as a form of comparison, Trafalgar Law's flashback contains no input from the narrator whatsoever, with the exception of stating times, places, and introducing characters. So it is interesting, very interesting, that this particular flashback becomes much more detailed with information that Sabo would have most keenly been aware of. But to be fair, it could also be this way because Oda was unable to find a more natural method of delivering this information through, say, dialogue, which doesn't happen often, but sometimes it is a bit like, I need to tell people things and I don't know how, so Oda just makes the narrator do it. Another fairly hilarious idea is that this story is being told by Bartolomeo, and I guess I don't hate this idea because it's very in keeping with his character. He obsesses over every morsel of Luffy info he can find, and you could feasibly believe that after or even during the events of One Piece, he traveled the world seeking out everyone who had contact with Luffy and strung together this story story from their accounts. He's definitely dedicated enough to do it. And also, we should not exclude the possibility of the story being narrated by Yamato. Given how important Oden's journal has been in Yamato's life, it would be a cool idea to see that Oden parallel go even further by attempting to log the voyage of the next Pirate King, just as Oden sort of did with Roger. Sort of, not really, but also kind of. Plus, Yamato wants to get out and see the world, and actually, when you think about it, pretty much everywhere that Luffy's been has actually been logged in Oden's journal. So it wouldn't be too difficult to find these people who have tales of Luffy to share. And as for some more left field ideas, then how about Panda Man? And just stay with me, because yes, it is ridiculous, but it's not as stupid as it sounds. It's actually far worse. Every now and then you encounter a rare person who believes that Panda Man is the narrator of One Piece, because no matter where Luffy is, Panda Man, like a good stalker, is also always there. In fact, no matter where anyone is, Panda Man is always there. And we can even extend this through time, because Panda Man does appear in flashbacks no matter how far we go back. He is a timeless, omnipotent entity capable of understanding all that is, all that was, and all that will be. Plus, Panda Man happens to be voiced by a man named Mahito Oba. And this is much wow, because Mahito Oba is also the voice of the narrator. And therefore, Panda Man is the narrator of One Piece. I mean, Oba also voices Smoker. But we're going to forget about that for now, because it's just not convenient to the narrative that I wish to present. Because the most important thing about being a One Piece theorist on the internet is possessing the ability to ignore any and all conflicting information.